Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about how AI, cognitive computing, and emotional intelligence is transforming QA, and a concept that we call Shift Up. Michael Giacometti, Head of Technical Services here at Eggplant, will be diving into the nuances of Shift Up, as well as covering a bit of the history of QA and how we have gotten to this concept today. If you have questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to fill out the chat box over to your right, and we will do our best to answer them during our Q&A session after the presentation. So, over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Lexi. So, good morning, everybody. This is Mike Giacometti here. One of the things I wanted to talk about today is really the transformation that we are going through within quality assurance. And it was kind of interesting just to talk a little bit about my background. That I initially started out in this in the late 90s. And that area, that time in the 90s was specifically on quality assurance as really just a modified form of unit testing. And really I started a company called Class IQ, which became a part of Green Hat. Had the fortune of working at Mercury Interactive, helping to implement Quality Center and Quick Test, and then moved on to some consulting things. So really the way I would look at it is that I've started and been fortunate enough to witness a lot of the major events within quality assurance. I've seen the evolution. I've seen it go from a service that is sort of, a tail of the dog, just needed to be done, to something that's really commanded how the IT development process is done, as is evidenced by CI/CD and DevOps today. So informally, I kind of call myself the Forrest Gump of QA. While not directly influencing everything, I have seen it all. And so one of the things that we've seen while we are over the evolution of QA and the way teams have been positioned now, especially in the Agile and DevOps world, is that every QA team that I've ever managed has been a smiling, happy bunch of individuals staring over a laptop at the same time. Well, the truth is that it's always been something where QA has either been the first outsourced, or it has been a organization that was a part of development or something outside of it. Anybody who's been in quality assurance management understands it for sure. And really what we're here to talk about today is where the evolution of QA, where is the next paradigm shift coming from? Despite all the noise you hear about the different testing tools out there, all the consulting agencies out there, really what is the difference in the change that we are seeing within quality assurance that is going to drive it for the next 20 years? So what I want to do here is kind of go over the evolution, because one of the things that I didn't mention during all this and was kind of implied, that if you talk to the different organizations, if you talk to different people who have influenced quality assurance, you're going to notice a couple of things. What started out as a buzzword and became commonplace or table stakes within QA had a very different origination and beginning. And so this is where I kind of wanted to cover this. So think back over your career within quality assurance, if you've been there for years, or even if you just recently started, or if you're paying attention to a lot of webinars and attending webinars like you are doing today. There are plenty of terms that started out in quality assurance that had an original meaning and transformed. I've picked three common ones, and really this is going to give you some insight into what's happening. And I'm going to pull back the fourth wall here, peel back the onion, whatever cliche you want to use. The idea here is that what you see is going to change over time, and I'll give you a hint about that in a moment. But concentrating on three of the big terms here, looking at the Center of Excellence, originally it was a grouping of automation engineers and manual testers working together under QA best practices. Now, the original purpose of this was to sell more licenses for Mercury Interactive, which, as many of you know, became HP and then was sold under Micro Focus. But really it was to sell more WinRunner licenses, more QTP licenses, and Quality Center licenses. The idea is that if you can get enterprise deals, it's just better for the software company in the long run. But because it was given to the QA community, and because it was given into leaders and people who were curious and had passionate about QA, it changed into something where COEs were a shared service for specialized testing across all lines of businesses. One of the things they found out was that testing tools by themselves did require a specific skill set, and that skill set needed to be contained and concentrated to serve the most number of people. So that, from a marketing term to an actual organizational practice, that was about a 7 to 8 year transformation. Now, my two favorite ones, which also led to Shift Up, talking about Shift Left, the original idea with that was that in 2000, 2005, that time range, most of the organizations that had quality assurance were either leads or managers that were reporting the development. And they were treated as such, where they didn't have a lot of say into the organization. So one of the things that was always happening, one of the big complaints about this before Agile, was that testing was always the tail end. It was always cut off. There were always scheduling issues. So the whole idea of shift left was to move QA up the IT value chain to have a seat at the project management office and the development leadership level. So there would be a three in the box, so to speak. Everyone would make decisions the same, and techniques that were picked up in the early versions of quality assurance, such as quality gates, would be implemented in the project management office in the development to have go, no-go, control over release management, so on and so forth. And the evolved definition, where it was originally organizational in nature, became purely technical in nature, where testing is performed earlier in the software development lifecycle. Conversely, you have shift right. And a little story about this. When I first started hearing shift right, I was actually a practice leader in one of the largest SIs in the world. And one of the funny things about it was that we were pushing hard on shift left so much that, shift right comes up and we're like, wait, what is that about? The original definition was to get more granular at the automation script level, which, if you think about the genesis of the Center of Excellence, was exactly what the Center of Excellence was doing. The Center of Excellence was to get people who were really excelling and smart with the automated script language we would call precision testing today around strong automation. And we really wanted to go back to that, shift more granular in scope to the automation script level. So you would see that the original purpose, where Selenium, UFT, and other testing tools were losing focus, going to shift right actually put those back into play, keyword-driven frameworks, accelerators, so on and so forth. The evolved definition is that now DevOps and Agile are shifting right towards testing the unpredictable, making the release go faster to production. Where now precision automation and precision testing is now a facet of that. Shift right has, if you want to take a look at the shift right scale, shift left was test earlier in production, test earlier in requirements design, shift right was get it out to production faster. Now, if you'll notice, there are two definitions that I didn't add on here. The first one was test case, and the second one was test script, because even after all this time, I doubt anyone could give me a common definition for both. Oh, and while we're at it, by the way, when I talk about CI/CD and DevOps and AI and machine learning, how many of you have heard standardized and consistent descriptions and definitions across the board? Every consultant agency, every testing tool company, every tool company is going to have a unique perspective on this. And actually, that's good for business. That's good for all of us. And the reason why is, if you can see the evolution of the definitions, that it is this evolution. We own it, we make it our own, we evolve the definition, and shared success and experienced success is replicated. So everything I tell you today around Shift Up, I want you to make it your own. And I want you to find ways to examine it and apply it personally to you. And so the first thing to do about this is to think about QA in a more strategic manner. So it's not about test case and defect reports and defect density and test case coverage. That's all very important. However, to think about it strategically at a director level, it really comes across two things. The first is to make QA more relevant across the software development lifecycle and indeed the organization. And the second is to make quality assurance financially viable. So anyone who was running a QA organization was always fighting the budget battle, the budget, time, money, and resources. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to transform quality assurance from a cost center to something that is either affecting the top line or bottom line revenue or outcome of an organization. If you can see certain things like the IRS site failing, retail websites on Black Friday dropping, you can see that the lack of quality assurance is having an effect on the bottom lines of organizations, or at least the branding and how people view these reputations. So branding, reputation, and bottom line are all affected. Sufficient to say that quality assurance has evolved to focus on business outcomes and good testing, good automation, test scripts. Everything that we said was a major success in quality assurance is now table stakes. So the question to decide now is, what next? Really what it comes down to is that we're taking a look at things in three new realities. The first thing to do, and I put it this way for a specific reason, is that you have to look at it in three manners, three perspectives. The first one is that businesses are more interconnected with each other. Business has changed. And when business has changed, and the businesses are more interconnected with each other, you realize that through either different supplier relationships, buyer-seller relationships, and the B2B, B2C, C2B relationships, everybody's interconnected. When one piece drops, they all drop. When one supplier isn't moving product, everybody suffers. The second thing is that branding is as important as quality, technical quality. Take a look at your organization. Think about who you work for today. Think about two things. First off, if there was a breach in the technology, what would be the impact? And that's pretty easy for all of us to quantify since most of us are technologists. The second thing to think about is what if there was another error where the trust between your business and the customer was broken? The contract, the social contract that existed failed. Something where it was devastating to the brand itself. Is one fail worse than another? And finally, third thing is to take a look at relationships. Relationships, especially in areas such as retail banking, are becoming more persistent and less transactional. What they want to do is they want to stop seeing you as somebody that deposits money and takes money out through a debit card, and instead they want to be, value aggregators, solution providers. They want to be able to knock walls down for you. In retail companies, they want to make sure that the buy-in relationship is always there, so you are a customer. So how can technology, branding, and customer sentiment all combine to create that persistent relationship? Second thing that's changed, and if you take a look at a lot of UI, UX webinars and do a lot of practice and studying around that, you're going to realize that your customer has changed. And I'm not talking about Gen X versus Millennial. I'm talking about the way technology has advanced and accelerated the way we accommodate product, how we accept it, how we move on, buy it, and leverage it. What you're going to notice are four things. Customer wants to be delighted. Second is that experiences, cultures, biases, and feelings are different. This is a very diverse world we live in. The internet and technology has really shrank the world, but it's opened it up to a lot more viewpoints and ways of thinking. Also, spending habits have changed. Gone are the days of the 1980s when everyone was running up credit. Mortgage market, take a look at that. The housing bubble. Also take a look that and think about how people are more interested in subscription buying now than they were just buying a product. They want to have something new, something fresh. Cell phones are being traded in every year to get the latest and greatest. And this is either a positive or negative, but the final point is that your customer is also much more vocal on social media. Think about Yelp reviews, Facebook, how fast things go viral. Organizations like G2 Crowd provide real-time company sentiment monitoring around what your customers are feeling about the organization. And then finally, technology has changed. We're going more towards SaaS and cloud. IoT and edge computing are becoming more common. And we're seeing more AI, machine learning, and analytics. Really what it's coming down to is that the product is important, data is becoming more important, and data is becoming as valuable as oil or gold. And so if you take a look at these three realities, is that we've got to change as quality assurance professionals, we've got to change the way we look at things. And before I do that, there are two perspectives I want to bring to you, and really the way I want to do that is I want to look at it through AT&T. Now, if you take a look on the left, one of the things that we're going to see here, and see if I can start it up, is that AT&T was, in the 1993 picture, useful for really predicting what was going to happen around things such as cell phones, being able to see people, GPS, really the whole You Will campaign. And that was really thinking, if you take a look around the perspective of that was technology's coming, you as the user better be ready to bend around it. If you take a look at what was going on in 2018, now what's happening is that the technology is there to be agile and flexible to the user. So in the same AT&T commercial in 2018, now what you see are robotics responding to the customer behavior. You're starting to see businesses being able to adapt on the fly about inventory. And instead, the relationship, in that span of almost 25 years, there's a difference in relationship where it used to be technology as a king. Now what we're doing is we're using technology to supplement and make more delightful your customer's life. We're making it more positive business outcomes and more positive customer experiences. And so, just to reiterate, in 1993, the person adapted to the technology, and in 2018, technology adapts to the person. Those are the two biggest things. So what this does is this means that we've got to change our thinking into what's called shift up. And shift up, I am a big proponent, and you might have known this from earlier in the presentation with the definitions and the evolutions of it, that there really isn't anything new under the sun. The ideas that I'm going to present to you, it's a way of putting it together and thinking about it in a different fashion. All I'm doing to you is giving you a different perspective on things. So shift up, at the basic definition of it, is a focus on the user, the environment they're in, and the business outcomes. If you want to think of yourself in a shift left and shift right environment, all shift up is the quality assurance person picking their head up, looking around, and actually understanding how the customer or the user is really operating their environment. And it breaks down into 4 processes. The customer is always right, and so is that one, and that one too. The second one is out of one tool, many. Actions speak louder than words. And then which channel? All of them. And so looking at the customer is always right. One, as I've said before, and as you've noticed, is that customers have different feelings about everything. What's 5-star to somebody is 1-star to somebody else. And what we have to decide is, from a testing and quality assurance perspective, is that what type of user behavior is considered a defect and which one isn't. So really what we're doing in Shift Up, and this is what you'll see in Eggplant AI later on in the presentation, is that we're using 2 things. The first one is ethnography, which is the study of social culture, biases, and behaviors to determine how a person uses a thing or environment. The second is psychometric analysis to measure mental and behavioral capacity. And then the third is being able to cover multiple customer types with a minimal number of personas. So if you think about this in the old ways, taking a look at business and technical requirements, you would test those, and then you have a UAT process, and invariably somebody else outside in beta testing would use it a different way. Can you accommodate for that? Can you predict that behavior? Can you integrate it into your quality assurance process, regardless if you're still using any form of waterfall or agile, or you've moved to full-on DevOps and CI/CD? So the point here is the customer is always right, and you've got to give serious consideration to the way they're doing things. And this is most strongly the area where, even if everything passes within testing during your test execution phases, it can still fail when it hit the street and go viral for all the wrong reasons very quickly. The second one is out of one tool, many. And when taking a look at this, what we're saying here is in no uncertain terms that the test management tool is dead. And if you think about what the test management tool was for, early on, it was to coordinate requirements, testing, test cases, and defects. And it was really to help the quality assurance manager and the IT organization keep a track of what was going on. Now what's happened is that you're starting to see AI-centric tools that can leverage multiple cognitive computing engines, multiple automation engines, put these test cases together based on a certain behavior, and then execute it. And it's also coming to the idea that tools need to be integrated all the time. So Jira, Rally, Maven, all these different tools are out there now. It's always Jira plus a test management tool. It's not the old days where there was the test management tool only. What we're seeing now is that the test management tool is becoming more and more de-emphasized in favor of AI. The third is actions speak louder than words. And metrics, analytics, and monitoring need to be fed into the testing tool, into your quality assurance tool in real time. What would be great, right now we have companies out there that'll do UI, UX analysis and tell you at this point in time in the Apple Store, your customer gave you 5 stars. That's great, but what is that doing to drive user behavior? What was the pathway that made them give you 5 stars or made them give you 2 stars? Humans also still have limited experience and potential, and I don't mean that in a negative light. You only know what you know. And when we take a look at these things, there are going to be users out there who use the product, who use it in ways that you've never intended to, and never measured it to, and never thought it would. And any organization that doesn't listen to the needs of the customer would automatically classify that as a defect. And then finally, which channel? All of them. Now, I remember going to the store, picking up a shirt, picking up some groceries, and having the interaction with the cashier. And then scanners came in. and now I can go to Amazon and a lot of subscription services. So what now, situation you have now is that you're having people that are using edge computing, predictive analytics, SMAC, which is social mobile analytics and cloud, which is something that Cognizant talks about, consulting talks about, which I really like a lot. You're looking at organizations with new technology, no technology, and B2B, B2C, C2B, C2C, peer-to-peer. All of these areas are starting to be different channels that you have to deal with. So what Shift Up does, let's look at it from the practical QA aspect, is that Shift Up supercharges Shift Left and Shift Right. And if you take a look at Shift Left and Shift Right, the whole point of that is to ensure application quality. Up the IT value chain, faster the market, like we talked about earlier. But if you add Shift Up, it tweaks and nudges what's supposed to happen. On the one hand, if you're using Shift Left and Shift Up, you're an advocate for the user and the business. And if you use Shift Up with Shift Right, you want to beat your competitors to the market. Think about certain statistics where the lifespan of companies on the Fortune 500 went from 70 years pre-2000 to 15 years today. Think about how many companies died because they didn't keep up with a more modern business model. Toys R Us is the recent example. The whole point of business is not just to delight the customer, but also to win. And so as a quality assurance leader, you need to evolve your mindset and your position to be more of a technical focus, yes, but you also need to look at it from a competitive landscape, a business landscape, and a customer landscape. Think of it like a three-legged stool, where you've got the business, the technology, and the customer. If any one of them fails, you fail as a QA leader. That's the evolution you need to make. The important thing to think about here, in your evolution as a QA thought leader and a practitioner, is really to think of yourself as a customer. So NBNA, which was a credit card issuer that was acquired by Bank of America, used to have this on top of every doorway. And the message was clear. The message was, regardless of the processes that you have in place, regardless of what we do, whenever you're on the phone with somebody, whenever you're putting out technology or creating a new banking product, put yourself in the customer's shoes. Be an advocate for the customer. Think of yourself as a customer. So when you're thinking of yourself as a customer and leveraging an AI engine to do it, what you're not doing is you're not replacing the customer. You're just anticipating the permutations and combinations that a customer would take. And in the AI world, the artificial intelligence world, as it applies to QA, it really comes into these 6 areas. The first are directed tests. Directed tests are what you would consider, regression test cases that need to be done, test cases that no matter what the release is, if it's a hot fix all the way through a general, these need to be executed. The second one is around coverage analysis. Which requirements are being covered? Which requirements are not being covered from a business and a technical requirement perspective. The third are features analysis. What features are you tracking? What features do you place a lot of emphasis on versus what are really being used in the real world? And then how do you test for that? The fourth one is bug hunting, which is traditional. That hasn't changed. And the two that are coming into vogue now with artificial intelligence and machine learning are really analytics and monitoring and custom AI. Analytics and monitoring are really simple. That's, what kind of data can I get? How am I using it? And then how can I drive that back into my testing process, my quality assurance process? With custom AI, it's a little unique. On the one hand, you've got AI engines like you're going to see with Eggplant. And you see ones that are pushed out by, Google and IBM with Watson and Salesforce with Einstein. But chances are the organization you are working in right now or another third party is creating an AI that does specific things. The AI engine that you have for your quality assurance should plug into the custom AI that you are using within your organization, because you want AI to talk to AI. This just helps to make testing more efficient. And what that's going to do is that's going to transform your automated testing. It's going to give you 5 new perspectives at least, and I've captured some of them here. It's going to tell you what you need to test. It's going to tell you what you don't need to test. It's going to mimic real users through real-time data and synthetic monitoring, and it's going to integrate digital and AI-driven events. And, I love disaster testing only because I used to get to break things, but in this case, we now can account and predict for natural disaster, geopolitics, and the unknown. So if you're an insurance issuer and there's been a natural disaster, you can predict what the load's going to be on new claims. If you are a car manufacturer, you can see what kind of trucks or cars are needed to replace that was broken. If you're in geopolitics and you're a financial service institution, what's going to be the Forex account, or what's going to happen to your Forex trading because of a problem that happens in the Middle East or Asia or anywhere around the world. And then finally, what are those disasters that you cannot predict or the unknown? This is why Shift Up lets you think of yourself as a customer. Now, even though you can't capture test cases per se, you can now account for them if you have a smart AI engine in the background conducting and orchestrating how the testing is done. So the Shift Up ecosystem with Eggplant is really unique and interesting. And the reason why is this. If you take a look at the traditional automated testing module, you're looking at the left half of the circle here, where Jira integrates to analytics, goes up to the model, and then around. And with Eggplant AI, this is how it works. You create your model, you create your snippets or functional tests, and then you go through and execute and capture the analytics. But with the addition of real-time and synthetic monitoring, you have real activity that's being monitored against KPIs, goes into analytics, feeds the execution of the model, and then really does a figure eight. So the way to read this is start at 1, where we can use the real-time and synthetic monitoring against real activity and KPIs. It goes to 2, where the AI model, in this case Eggplant AI, will determine what test cases need to be put together and executed. And then it goes down to 3, where you're testing and focusing on what really matters. And that's taken into account, like I said earlier, the functional coverage and the requirement coverage through a tool like Jira, and what you're seeing in the realm in synthetic monitoring. So this is the new Shift Up ecosystem. It takes into account shift left, it takes into account shift right, and because of the real user monitoring and the synthetic monitoring, it gives you that customer perspective that you would not normally be able to get. So going on to what I said earlier about the test tool being dead, AI is essentially the new test management tool. And if you think about what I said earlier, where the test management tool just helped you put together the requirements, test cases, test execution results, and defects. What AI really does is 2 things. 1, it acts as the conductor on how to put the different tests together. And 2, it integrates multiple technologies to create one seamless end-to-end experience. So we have load and stress testing, database testing, API testing, IoT and edge computing, and all of this can be now tested under one engine, one tool through Eggplant AI and Eggplant Functional, and at the same point in time, it's going to be a cost and time saver. So one of the things that you may be asking yourself right now is, all right, this looks good. We understand how it's supposed to work in theory, but I've already got UI, UX testing. There are other features out there. What makes this different? So if you take a look, and let's concentrate on the UI framework and the UX testing for a second. The UI framework testing is going to be your Selenium, your Appium, your UFT. And the UX testing is going to be around 2 things, either standards or how it's going to be tested. And what we're noticing is that if you're taking a look at a shift right perspective, that you want to get tools into the market, yet you want to shift up and take a look at the customer perspective, that you really only have 2 options when it comes to UX testing. The first one is to just do standards check. Look, feel, does it look pleasing? Does it have my corporate colors? Are the fonts right? And then the other one, which you will hear as in the wild testing or crowd testing, is where customers or potential users who fit a certain demographic are going to be executing on your application or your hardware. And there are companies out there that do that. It's more of a modified field testing. And the problem that you get with this is that by doing any sort of field testing, yes, you do get the customer perspective, but it also drags out a testing timeline and really increases the chance for the fact that a poor release could drastically or negatively impact your business outcomes. So the question you have to ask yourself is, can I use AI to replace field testing? In some cases, no. But I would say in 95% of the cases, this can be a replacement. So you need the Eggplant suite to be able to speed up that testing for you, give you that perspective, but at the same point in time, get you to production faster. So this is really an example here where I'm going to play a video, and really one of the things that we do is we use Shift Up, even inside of Eggplant. And what you're going to see here are a couple things. The one thing that we need to address, one of the things, is that first off, using the AI engine should be easy, intuitive to learn. The second is that it should be immediately productive. And what you're going to see here is a class at Temple University where we had 26 students use Eggplant AI to model out their senior projects. They were experts and up and running with the complete Eggplant solution within 30 minutes. And so if you take a look at this video, you're going to see a couple of things. First thing that you're going to see is that all 26 of the students are using the Eggplant AI cloud-based solution to model their apps. And that guy on the left right there that was looking down, he was actually modeling on his iPhone. And that's why we like Shift Up too, because we really didn't think about being able to model AI on your cell phone. And as you see here, their senior projects are how to fix and adjust the admissions process at Temple University, their website. And so that video was showing the students how they could use the Eggplant solution and model their QA testing to test all of the different pathways that a freshman or incoming freshman for Temple University would use that website. What I wanted to show here is how the Eggplant solution is using Shift Up with real-time monitoring. What you're going to see here, let me mute the video so I can talk over it, but what you're going to see here is how Eggplant, as it's leveraging Shift Up with what we call real-time monitoring. And if you look earlier in the diagram, remember that, you're going to see that there was real-time user monitoring and synthetic monitoring. And the way Eggplant works is that we leverage the entire suite of solutions within our offering, and we leverage things, in this case, Eggplant Functional and Eggplant AI, to really navigate applications, to understand, like we showed earlier, what defects and bug hunting it can do, what coverage analysis, what directed tests. But at the same point in time, we also have to ask the questions, what are the users really doing? What are the users doing in their browsers? What are they doing with connections? How are we anticipating their behavior? How are we anticipating how they're leveraging the application if, for example, an airplane flies overhead and they get distracted, or they're not happy with the price and they bounce out of the application, or they see something cheaper on Amazon rather than what they're looking at on your app? How do they adjust for that? How do you test for that? And the answer to that is real-time user monitoring. And what you have here with Eggplant real-time user monitoring is we're taking a look at session information that's tracked with each user. We can track it through demographics, country, connection type, platform, and we send all that information to our AI engine. And that AI engine, as you saw with the Citibank example, will power through different test cases, putting them together, exercising the age-old best practices of automation of parameterization and modularization to create test cases that you and your team probably wouldn't have thought of. So by using the entire Eggplant suite, by leveraging synthetic monitoring, by looking at real-time user monitoring, by combining that with AI, you truly get a Shift-Up perspective. It gives you not only continuous testing, but it also mitigates as much of the risk as possible in seeing and observing how your application will affect and be affected in production outside of the environment, outside of once it's released. So what we have here is a call to action. As QA practitioners, we've got to continue what we've started. QA through DevOps is being integrated into teams. It's being, it's still not looked at with the same sort of severity and importance that it should. And so it's up to all of us to advocate for that. Remembering the three-legged stool I talked about earlier, we have to show value to customer, IT, management. Combining IT and management, we also have to look at it from a business perspective, that we've got to keep everybody happy. And we've got to take a look at it where we are not just assuring the quality of the organization and the product, but we're also ensuring business outcomes. Remember what the definition of quality assurance is. We're taking a look at the end-to-end process. And as I talk here, we got to focus on quality assurance rather than quality control. Finding bugs, executing test cases is table stakes. Now it's up to us to make sure that the business runs as expected. The second thing, and this is where I'm going to get into a little bit of trouble even internally at Eggplant, is that you don't really want to burn down what you have. You want to build on it. You want to modify it. Good AI engines, like Eggplant AI, should integrate into what solutions and tools you currently have. Make sure if your processes change, it's because they have to change, because of business outcomes, because of priorities, because of new practices, but not because of the tool. Focus on your people, educate them, upskill them. we still need QA experts. And you may have heard and experienced yourself right now where you have to convert to what are called SDETs, or software developers, engineers, and tests, or some variation of the acronym. I've heard 5 different versions of it. But the idea here is that QA professionals need to be more technical. The problem is that, let's face it, developers really don't want to do QA, and a lot of QA people need to be focused on the business outcomes. So you need something that's going to complement that. If you do look at external products, tools, and suites, I know that there's an inclination now, especially with development houses and as QA and development teams are merging, to build your own framework. This right here is what spawned the whole test tool movement starting in 1999. The idea was that tools and frameworks that were built were too hard to maintain and were only good for that particular developer. So the OpEx and CapEx cost could be a little bit higher for tools and solutions, but I encourage you to look at that as opposed to the long-term maintenance cost and bandwidth consumption of building something internally. And then finally, think of yourself as a customer. You need to be enabled and empowered by the tool. The tool should not drive your behavior. And then also you need to consider how a customer is going to use your product. That's going to differ from the requirements. You might get closer, but there's always that one person that's going to click B before they click A. So how can you account for that for your testing? And even if you can't think of all the requirements, can you at least use an AI engine like Eggplant AI and the Eggplant suite to cover and mimic that pathway if possible? And then finally, and I hope I get some good questions in this webinar, and I'm sure I will, but always question the hype. Always question everything you hear. Shift left, shift up, shift right, DevOps, whatever term you're hearing, always question the person delivering the message, because that's the only way we're going to evolve it. And with that, I'd like to take some questions.
Thank you so much for all of that insight, Michael. And now, as Michael mentioned, it's time to take on some questions. So our first question comes from an individual at Sony, and this person asks, what is the significance of shift up to the current context of QA?
Well, thank you for the question. The significance of shift up to QA is really, as I mentioned, to think of yourself as a customer. And really the way we're doing it now is we're starting to dabble in it with UI and UX testing. I'm talking about as a QA industry, as a practice. But what we need to do is we need to consider what the user actions would do. Can we simulate the behavior? Can we take a look at the ideas that could affect a business, to things that the requirements designers and the coders never even thought about? So shift up is taking that perspective as how could the customer use the product, how will they use it, and how could they use it, and implementing that into the context of QA. And traditionally, this was done, you normally through a UAT session or maybe a beta test. And what we're noticing is that would either extend the product out so far, or you would get a lot of defects that were called, but then they would be either put into a backlog or triage to be handled in a later release. What we want to do with Shift Up and Eggplant, at least, is to be able to get that tested now while time to change the code or change the behavior, and then make sure that we ensure a quality and delightful customer experience. So the significance of Shift Up in QA is quite easy to think of yourself as a customer and really drive customer thinking and feeling into that area. Just as a quick aside here, one of the things that reminds me of is a situation we ran into with a major fast food chain, casual restaurant chain, where they were actually saying that the software tested correctly, the usage tested correctly, they did the requirements, they did the testing, it worked out fine, but they realized that they were losing sales in certain locations. And after we took a look at it from a ethnographic and a psychometric perspective using AI, we learned that the reason why the sales were differing was actually because of the quality of education in the two areas. The employees in the one area were having a different, more practical, rounded education, which made them adapt easier to the processes and the point of sale and the processes to serve the food, prepare the food, whereas in the education in the other area actually affected otherwise. So this would be something that you could never test for, but using Eggplant, we were able to predict that and adjust for it. Thanks for the question.
An individual from Trading Peaks asks, can we use this approach when scaling our QA?
Perfect, thank you. Uh, Short answer, yes. And the reason why that is because remember, what you want to do with scaling QA, it's usually when people talk about scaling, they look at it as a resource intensive activity, a time intensive activity. But because of advances in quality assurance and how we apply things to business outcomes and leveraging ideas like Shift Up, scaling is now virtual or it has a cost of zero. And what I mean by that is by letting the AI engine take a look through synthetic monitoring and real-time user monitoring, you're able to build test cases on the fly and execute those to really scale up to a thinking to yourself as a customer perspective, to a shift up perspective, without really adding any more resources or any more time. Eggplant AI has the capability to execute over several virtual machines. So the cost to create the test cases, the cost to execute the test cases, and the cost to analyze the results is a lot smaller than what they used to be. There's still a little bit of a cost, but it is nowhere near as drastic and can be handled within a testing cycle.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Another great question comes from someone at Texas Mutual Insurance. They ask, what's the first step in shifting perspective in order to incorporate Shift Up?
This is a great question. The answer itself really has nothing to do with quality assurance and more behavioral management. And one of the ways I got into this, into quality assurance, was quite by accident. But one of the passions I always had was around leadership and management. And so when you're taking a look at Shift Up, the way to do shift in perspective into this is that you've got a number of people to change. The first one's internal to the QA team. The second is development. The third is the business. And really, this is an organizational change. This is where you need to build consensus within your team and then your organization or department and then your organization, and really say that the importance of thinking of the customer is much more important than making sure that we're looking at test case coverage or something. Yes, that's important. The metrics are important. But the idea here is that by shifting up, what you're doing is you're putting the customer at the forefront of what your technology and tools are. And really that's what's putting the money in your paychecks. So the way I would incorporate Shift Up is really first, look at it like an organizational change. Try to build cohesion and consensus within your team. Look at your management and your leadership and tell them what you're thinking and why you're thinking, and come up with steps that you can get there. Aim a few steps that you can accomplish quickly and get some small wins. And then really just be the change. Exhibit not just what a quality assurance person is supposed to do, but be an advocate for your customer. And there are plenty of consulting organizations out there that really understand how to do this organizational change. And Eggplant has relationships with many of them, and we'd be happy to help you out later on if you want to contact me offline.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from an individual at Selective Insurance. This person asks, how can this be leveraged in day-to-day QA activities?
Well, another great question. I'm going to answer this in two perspectives. The first one is a customer-facing perspective, an attitude perspective. And that really is to be the change, to live it in the QA activity, understand who you're working for and why you're working for them. The second thing to do is, if I'm going to leverage it in the QA activities, it really breaks down, and we can use Eggplant as an example here, where the real-time and synthetic user monitoring is important. You'll be able to pull analytics from that. You'll be able to understand how the user is using it and how the test cases you've created and executed against it are behaving against your application under test. That'll get you under and save you from a test planning perspective. From a test case design perspective, because the AI engine is already leveraging the requirements that you have in Jira or some other tool, it's leveraging what it, as it learns, it gets smarter. So it's leveraging what it executed against through regression runs or other, new functionality runs. The AI engine is actually going to put those test cases together for you so you can determine how it's going to be executed. So what I would say here is that it's going to be leveraged in your day-to-day activities by, one, the Eggplant AI engine, two, thinking of yourself as a customer and making sure that everything you do, the customer is advocated for in your meetings, in your stand-ups, in your huddles, and really looking at it as not just a measurable amount of permutations and combinations to test, but really be focused around what your business outcome and your end result is.
Thank you so much, Michael. And our last question here does build off of a good number of the questions asked, and it comes to us from someone at New York Life. This person asks, how can QA leadership drive the inception of these concepts discussed today?
I like the phrasing of this question because you talk about leadership. And this is much more of a leadership exercise than it is a management exercise. All of us have it in it within ourselves to be the change, think of ourselves as the customer, to shift up and take a look at that perspective. But for leadership, you've got to drive the importance of why it's important to look for the customer and to advocate on behalf of them. But at the same point in time, you also have to demonstrate through tool sets, through process and people, and through Eggplant solutions, how everything's already there to where the benefits and the return on investment is huge, but the cost to get there is actually very small. And so, from a leadership perspective, you're driving it, you're leading it, you're leading from the front. From a internal and cost perspective, you're looking at ROI break-even points. You're saying that advocating for a customer is going to have great business outcome and financial impact on the top and bottom line, but it's also going to have nominal or minimal effects on the cost of testing within your organization. And then finally, create a collection of small wins. You know, there's nothing stopping you from looking at things like G2 Crowd or looking at the Android store or Google Play or what have you. And the idea here is take a look at what your people or your customers are saying after the release. What are their perceptions? Are you looking for more 5 stars rather than 2 stars? Are you looking at the net promoter scores? Are the changes that you're making today having a positive impact 6 months down the road? So your job as a leader is to bring all these perspectives into focus into something that's digestible and goals that are attainable for your team and the organization around you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today to discuss Shift Up. I understand we had limited time, so we only got to a handful of questions. So if you do want to reach out, have more questions for Michael in particular, or any of us here at Eggplant, you can reach us at the emails below, michael.giacometti@eggplant.io or sales@eggplant.io. We're looking forward to seeing you at the next event.